then you're not going to lose that purchasing power because the fund will rise to reflect the decline in the value of the dollar.
Right. It was doing around 18% a year until this last year, of course, and I think
that's because, what
as
happens
was mentioned,
is,
there's a rise in the apparent strength of the dollar, but as you said, I think that's going to turn around and really go down. The amount of money that the Fed has monetized is huge, but one of the things that wasn't mentioned in the show today is that a lot of that money hasn't transformed into currency and gone into circulation yet, but when it does, I think the dollar is going to plummet.
Yeah, a lot of it is still being held in treasuries. It's being held in bank accounts, but it will get spent. I mean, right now people want cash because they think things are risky and they're unsure about things, and so they want to hold cash. But the minute they start to appreciate the cash losing value, when they start to see prices rising, when they start to see asset prices rising, and they start to think that, wait a minute, it's the currency that's risky. And now they want out of currency, then it really starts to collapse. And then, of course, when stocks are falling, when people were willing to sell stocks that had 10% dividends, it was only because they were dropping in price, and they were afraid that the stocks would fall so much that it would negate any of the dividend. But once the stocks start rising and people start seeing an uptrend, why would they want to sell an asset with a 10% yield that's appreciating? What would they do with the money? Put it in cash and get nothing? And what? So I think the dynamics are going to change very quickly, and people are going to be surprised by how rapidly not only asset prices rise abroad, but consumer prices rise here at home. Anyway, thanks for the call.
All right, thank you.
All right, and last up is Lewis in California. Go ahead, Lewis.
Hey, Peter. Hey, just not only are you a great mind, but you're very entertaining. But my question is, I hear a lot of people talk about Glass-Steagall, how it was in 1998, it was repealed, and they contribute that to the mess that we're in. How would you answer someone that would say something like that?
Well, I think that's faulty logic. You say, well, this thing happened, and then assume that because this happened, something else happened, but there's no real link. I mean, let's assume I got really fat, and I also happen to eat carrots. You could say, well, eating carrots makes you fat. Well, no, just because I happen to be fat and I also ate carrots doesn't mean that it was the carrots that made me fat. Maybe it was the chocolate sundaes that I was eating that made me fat.
Right.
So there's no actual link. So, yes, they did repeal these things, and, yes, we did have a big problem. But you can't connect those two together and say the problem is because of that. But for politicians, it's always very convenient. They want more regulation. They always want to say we're in trouble because there wasn't enough regulation. There wasn't enough government. When the reality is there was too much government. Now, in some areas, there wasn't enough government, but was only in areas that government had already corrupted, like in Freddie and Fannie. Yes, Freddie and Fannie needed more regulation because they were operating with a government guarantee. So since the government blessed them with this guarantee, yes, they should have regulated them much more heavily. But had they never blessed them in the first place, there would have been no need for regulation because the market would have regulated them.
Right.
So it all plays into their agenda. I mean, the politicians love to do this. The way, the late Harry Brown, we used to say, government is, the way they work is they break your leg, and then they hand you a crutch, and they say, see, without me you couldn't walk. That's what the government does. And this is perfect. And that's why whoever that was in the Obama administration said we can't waste this crisis. I mean, look at all the things they're shoving down our throats. All this health care reform now, and all this stuff is being shoved into the market on the idea that it's going to solve the economy. I mean, none of this is going to help the economy. I mean, it's even crazy where they're saying we have to bring down the cost of health care and the cost of education. And the way we're going to bring down these costs is by spending more money on it. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. But the only way that they're able to jam all this legislation through is on the basis that there's an economic crisis, and somehow this legislation is going to solve it. And I think I think a lot of people understand that the problem is so big. They figure, you know what? What the hell? The argument, when people talk about we're adding $2 trillion to the national debt, what they're saying is, yes, that is horrific. That's terrible. But we have to do it because we have to solve the economy. We have to stimulate the economy, and so we have to accept these deficits. But, of course, the faulty logic of the whole thing is that the deficits are going to help the economy. They're not. They're going to make it worse. Going deeper into debt makes the problem worse. It doesn't solve the problem, but we've simply resigned ourselves to the fact that we can solve the problem by printing money and going into debt. And even the president of the EU, that guy from Czech Republic, said that America is on the road to hell. So even the Europeans can see it. Even the French can see it. Can you imagine getting lectured by the French about being too irresponsible, about the government being too big? And, I mean, that's how far we've gone.
Do you think Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac will I mean, because the
anyway,
hey,
Lewis, I got to cut you off. There's 30 seconds left. Call next week. Anyway, thanks a lot, everybody, for listening. And for those of you who are at Seder's tonight, if you couldn't listen live, good Pesach. Anyway, that's it. Don't forget to call 800-727-7922, 800-727-7922. And if you haven't already picked up Crash Proof for the little book, buy them soon. Thanks, everybody. I'll be back again next week. So long. Thanks for listening.